This video depicts topics of violence, murder, and death and is not suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
The Hwaseong serial murders, also known as the Hwaseong killings, were a series of 10 brutal unalivings that occurred in the rural areas surrounding the city of Hwaseong in the Gyeonggi province, South Korea, between 1986 and 1991. The case is notable for the gruesome nature of its occurrence, the extended period during which the crimes took place, and the fact that the perpetrator managed to evade capture for many years. Here is a detailed explanation of the Hwaseong serial murders. On September 15th, 1986, the first unaliving occurred. A 71-year-old, year old woman was found as aid and unalived in her home in Hwaseong. The crime scene exhibited signs of extreme violence. A year later, on July 17th, 1987, the second unaliving occurred. A 25-year-old woman in this case was found unalived in the field, also as aid and strangled. The modus operandi was similar to the first unaliving that occurred on the September 15th, 1986. On April 15th, 1988, the third unaliving occurred. Again, another 25-year-old woman was discovered as aid and strangled in a greenhouse. Again, the crime bore the hallmarks of the previous unalivings that occurred. On October 20th, 1988, the fourth unaliving occurred. This time, a 14-year-old girl was found Ard and unalived in her own home. This case heightened public fear and increased pressure on law enforcement. January 11th, 1990, the fifth unaliving occurred. This time, a 69-year-old woman was found unalived in her home as aid and strangled. The pattern of violence unfortunately continued. The sixth unaliving occurred on April 3rd, 1990, when a 71-year-old woman was discovered raped and unalived in her home. The police were struggling to make progress solving the cases. On September 16th, 1991, the seventh unaliving occurred. This time, a 63-year-old woman was found unalived in her home. The brutal nature of the crime and the similarity with the previous cases intensified the urgency to catch the perpetrator. On April 23rd, 1992, the eighth murder occurred. This time, a 26-year-old woman was discovered raped and strangled in a vacant house. The community was gripped by fear, and authorities faced growing criticisms for their failure to apprehend the murderer. On October 20th, 1992, the ninth unaliving occurred. A 29-year-old woman was found unalived in her home, SA'd, and strangled. The pattern of unalivings remained consistent. The final unaliving occurred on April 3rd, 1993. The final victim was a 31-year-old woman who was discovered raped and unalived in her home. The Hwaseong serial murder was finally come to an end with this 10th victim. The Hwaseong serial murders became one of South Korea's most infamous unsolved cases. Despite extensive investigations, the police struggled to identify the killer. The lack of evidence and forensic technology at the time and the absence of modern criminal profiling techniques hindered the progress. Thankfully, in 2019, over 2 decades after the last unalivened, the case saw a breakthrough. Using advanced DNA analysis, authorities identified Lee Chong-ye as a prime suspect. Lee was already serving a life sentence for rape and unaliving his sister-in-law. He confessed to the Hwaseong killings in a chilling admission. He had evaded captures for years, and the crimes had remained unsolved due to the limitations of forensic technology at the time of their occurrence. Lee Chao-jae confessions brought closure to the victims' families and highlighted the advancements in forensic science that played a crucial role in solving the case. The Hwaseong serial murders remains a dark chapter in South Korea's criminal history, underscoring the challenges investigators faced in the absence of modern forensic tools. Unfortunately, specific details about the personal lives and consequently the making of a biography of the individual's victims in the Hwaseong murders is not readily available or well documented in the public domain. The information available tends to focus more on the circumstances of the crimes, the investigation, and the eventual resolution of the case. What is known is that the victims were women ranging in age from their teens to their 70s. They were from different backgrounds and lived in the rural areas of Haseong in the Gyeonggi province in South Korea. The crimes were marked by extreme brutality, including SA and unaliving. Given the sensitive nature of the case and the need to respect privacy and dignity of the victims and their families, a detailed biographical information, about each individual victim is not disclosed in this video. It's important to approach discussion about true crime cases with empathy and consideration for the victims and their loved ones. The focus should be on acknowledging the tragedy and the events and the impact they had on the community rather than sensationalizing or delving into personal details of the victims' lives. The Hwaseong serial murders investigation faced significant challenges, particularly in the early years when forensic technology was not as advanced as it is today. However, as the case progressed and technology improved, crucial pieces of evidence were collected, leading to the eventual identification and arrest of the perpetrator, Lee Jung-jae. Here is a breakdown of the evidence involved in the Hwaseong serial murders. The crime scene evidence. Crime scenes were marked by consistent patterns of extreme violence, including SA and strangulation. A forensic analysis of the crime scenes provided insights into the modus operandi of the murderer, indicating similarities between the various unalivings. Forensic evidence. DNA played a crucial role in solving the case. Early in the investigations, thankfully, DNA samples were collected from the crime scenes. Advances in DNA technology over the years allowed investigators to re examine and extract more information from the collected DNA samples. Pattern analysis. Investigators identified a pattern in the choice of victims, locations, and methods used by the perpetrator. The pattern helped link the murders together. Behavioral profiling, though not as sophisticated as modern criminal profiling, was employed to understand the potential characteristics and motivations of the killer. Witness testimonies. Witnesses provided statements related to the suspicious activities or individuals in the vicinity of the crime scenes. Some witnesses described sightings of a man in dark clothing near the crime scenes, but these accounts were not sufficient to identify the perpetrator. Law enforcement efforts. The police engaged in extensive efforts to gather information from the community, conduct interviews, and follow leads. Despite these efforts, the lack of advanced forensic technology at the time hindered progress in identifying the killer. Law enforcement made public appeals as well in the community for information, urging them to come forward with any details that might assist in solving the case. The case became a matter of public concern, and the community was on edge due to the prolonged series of unsolved murders. Breakthrough in DNA analysis. One of the breakthroughs in the case came in 2019 when advanced DNA analysis technology was applied to the collection evidence. The re examination of the DNA evidence led to the identification of Lee Jong Jae as the prime suspect. Confession of Lee Chang Jae. Lee Chang Jae was already serving a life sentence for another crime when he confessed to the Hwaseong serial murders in 2019. His confession, combined with the DNA evidence linking him to the crimes, provided the conclusive evidence needed to close the case. The Hwaseong serial murders stands as a case where advancement in forensic technology ultimately played a pivotal role in solving a long standing mystery. The case also underscores the importance of perseverance in law enforcement efforts and the potential for justice, even in the cases that remain unresolved for many years. The Hwaseong serial murder case remained unsolved for many years, and the suspect, La Chang-jae, was only identified in 2019. Prior to the revelation of his identity, the case baffled investigators, and various potential suspects were considered. However, as of today, the only person implicated in the unaliving of the 10 victims is Lee Chang-jae. Lee Jong-jae became the prime suspect in the Hyeseong murders when he confessed to the crimes in 2019. At the time, he was already serving a life sentence for the rape and unaliving of his sister-in-law in 1994. He was born in 1963 and had a criminal record before his confession to the unalivings. He had been incarcerated for the aforementioned crime since 1994. The breakthrough came in the case when his DNA analysis was applied to the evidence collected in the crime scene. Lee's DNA matched the samples, leading to his confession and subsequent conviction of the Hwaseong killings. Lee Jong-jae's motives for the murders and specific details of his criminal activities were not extensively detailed in publicly available information. It's important to note that the identification of Lee Chang-jae marked a significant development in the case, providing closure for the victims' families and the community. Before this breakthrough, the investigation faced challenges in identifying a specific suspect due to the lack of advanced technology and during the early stages of the inquiry. Of course, since this posting of this video, there have been no new developments in the case, and it is considered as solved and closed. Specific details about the individual law enforcement agents involved in the investigation of the Hwaseong serial murders from 1986 to 1991 case are not readily available in the public domain. Law enforcement agencies often operate collectively, and the focus in publicly available information tends to be on the overall efforts of the investigation teams rather than the individual officers involved. In the high profile case like the Hwaseong serial murders, multiple agencies collaborated, including local police departments, investigative units, and forensic experts. The investigation would have involved various officers, detective, forensic analysts, and other specialists working together to solve the case. It's important to note that due to the sensitive nature of law enforcement operations and the need to protect the privacy and safety of those involved, the names and specific details of individuals officers may not be disclosed publicly in many jurisdictions. If there has been any public acknowledgments or accommodations for specific officers or teams involved in the ASEAN case, the information might be available through police o- office departments, statements, press releases, or news reports. For the latest information about the law enforcement personnel involved in the Hwaseong murder case, it is recommended that you refer to the official statements from the relevant South Korean law enforcement agency or recent news sources.